It's really great to have you here and to talk about how we can improve the really important tactic that has been long used in Australia, which is blockades, and before that, or like alongside that, occupations. We're going to be covering a few things in relation to the past of blockades and why they've been so important in the progressive movement. Hopefully, I live next to a train line, so hopefully that doesn't bleed into the conversation too much. There's one going past now. Maybe before we begin, Mina, if you just go to the next slide, we can do a bit of an acknowledgement. Everywhere tonight, everyone's, wherever you are, you're on the land of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That land and that country is really important and integral to Aboriginal people across Australia and Torres Strait Islander people on the north coast of us. That sovereignty was never ceded, and so we have to pay respect to those communities, the elders, and the law that they are teaching us. And in paying respect to that and in learning about it, we can really improve the way in which we operate and the way in which we pursue progressive changes to society. In particular, the Wangan and Jagalingou people, which we have pictured here, they have been fighting hard. Adrian Burugaba, he's been here since the beginning. He's been fighting the longest. And arguably has the most at risk. And he's an amazing speaker and someone who really provides a lot of support and direction to the Adani campaign through his teachings. And so we have to pay respect to him as an elder and a community leader. And also to all of the emerging elders that we are yet to meet and those that have passed before us. Anisa or Andy, do you want to add anything to that?
That sounds good.
Well, I'll introduce you then. Tonight we're going to be chatting, Anisa and Andy and myself, and we'll be making space for people also to add their 2 cents. But we'll be going through an agenda. Of course, we've thought of something, and we'll be running through that. So Anisa is in Melbourne. And has been doing a lot of work with FLAC and XR and has a lot of interest and put a lot of energy into blockades and also solidarity work and decolonizing. And so it's really great to have you along to speak tonight, and Andy as well. Long time listening to people's stories and putting them out into the world, whether it's through your writing or through the broadcasting that you do in Brisbane. And so great to have 2 people who have really spent a lot of time listening and putting together stories and connecting the dots and finding out more and asking questions. So it's going to be great to hear your thoughts and the stories that you've come into contact with. And I'm organising for Galilee Rising, have been for the last 6 months or so, and am really excited to continue organising, even though we've got the coronavirus pandemic at the moment, which is keeping us all at home. We're really glad to take this opportunity to talk about what it is that makes a blockade important, and how we can improve those blockades in the future so that we're getting successful change for a progressive movement. Yeah, Anisa, did you want to add anything to that, or Andy? Maybe something about yourself or why you're here tonight?
I think the only thing that I can think to add is both Andy and I really like history, and especially activist history. So we're quite excited to get to talk about one of our favourite nerd topics. So if you have any questions about any of the blockades or anything, or any other parts of activist history, feel free to put it in the chat or hang around a bit afterwards, because it's really one of our favourite topics.
And yeah, we've both been involved in the Adani campaign with FLAC for a long time, and spent a lot of time living at blockade camps as well. And so that's a big part of what we're talking about today as well, the practice of being in camps and doing direct action. And so the topic that we both love, I know.
Cool. I guess a few housekeeping things. Everyone's, I'm sure, very practiced at Zoom these days. Keep in mind that we can hear conversation if your mic's not on mute. We're going to be jumping into a breakout room and then coming back again. And so when that happens, sometimes your mute might go on or off. Just keep in mind that those changes you need to look out for. We have the chat room where people are chucking in questions and things that they're thinking or feeling, and also just let us know where you're from and your name if you need to. And for those who maybe didn't catch it before, we're offering a $15 voucher code for Deliveroo if that's something that you can access, because we're keen to share around a little bit of our resources at the moment with coronavirus, in the spirit of mutual aid. So if you're interested in that voucher code for $15 from Deliveroo, get in touch with Sabrina in the chat. You can click to send a message to Sabrina in the chat, or if you're not sure how to use that, feel free to send an email to info@galileerising.com, and we can follow up with you after the call. So maybe we can kick it off. And the first thing, I should say, during this, Mina, if maybe you could just go back to screen share. And we'll go to the agenda is sort of three main topics. So we're going to be looking a bit of the history, and then we're going to go into a breakout and look at some of the barriers that often arise for people when they're thinking of going to camp or an occupation or some kind of frontline. And then we're going to look at what kind of progress has been won, what kind of changes have been won through blockades and occupations, and then we'll have some time for questions. And the other thing that we wanted to say just before we get started is that this is your history as well. There'd be a lot of people on the call tonight who have been at camp or have been at some kind of camp in the past. And so we're really keen to get your input. And so if we just go to the next slide. So we've got these slides, and Mina will be able to share that document or I can share the document in the chat. And what we're really keen for you to do is jump into this document and add onto these post-it notes that stories that you have or memories that you have from blockading or from occupations or from frontline camps, because it's really important that we recognize that there's a lot of experience in the room. So without any further ado, I should say, Anisa, why don't you tell us about some of the long history of occupations and blockades?
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And yeah, if people want to jump on there at any time, if you think of a a memory or something exciting about being at a blockade before, please do. That would be wonderful. Or you could even chuck it in the chat, and I'm sure one of us will be able to post it over. So awesome. So we're talking about occupations, we're talking about blockades, and these things have a really long history in this continent. These are times when people have occupied spaces in order to stop unjust things, you know, for example, destruction to our environment, where people have occupied space to make demands of the government or of businesses, you know, for example, for better wages. And people have also been doing this, yeah, to gain more control over our lives rather than just kind of being told what to do by the government or waiting for them to fix things for us. So to me, that's one of the most exciting parts of an occupation. We wanted to start off by talking about this history with one of the most important occupations of this continent, which a lot of people might have heard of, the Wave Hill Walkout. So that was, yeah, quite a few decades ago in the Northern Territory. And people might have heard of it from the song From Little Things, Big Things Grow. It's a beautiful story written by Kev Carmody and Paul Kelly. And in the story, about 200 Gurindji people walked off the cattle station that they were working at. And originally everyone thought that they were demanding, you know, better work and living conditions, because the living conditions were pretty crap back then and the work was not very well paid. But after a while, the Gurindji people made it pretty clear that the primary goal of their occupation was to get their land back, to have some of their lands returned to them. And so it took quite a while. They occupied the space for 9 years. And it's a really amazing history of the things that they built on the land and how they petitioned government, and the government and the landowners tried to offer them all these different things, but they stayed strong. And so after 9 years, Gough Whitlam came and he gave them official land rights. And yeah, people might have seen this famous photo before with Whitlam pouring the handful of sand into Vincent Nyinglary's hand. So yeah, it's a really powerful story about what can be won, and also a beautiful song. So what we thought in putting this together was that learning from history of occupations and blockades, learning this history is so vital for us to know what works well and what we can improve on. Thinking about what sort of skills that we need, and also to inspire ourselves and to inspire each other by the stories and the wins. So I'll go through a few of the many blockades that have happened and are happening in this country, and hopefully that will inspire you to look more into these stories. And as I said before, feel free to ask questions, and we'll send around extra information for anyone extra keen. But we'll go to the next slide and start off with TERANIA Creek, which I think there was some people on the call who said they were from up this area. TERANIA Creek, it's 35 k's north of Lismore, and that's where the first blockade to protect a forest in Australia happened, and it may have even been the first forest blockade in the world, which is pretty exciting. So it started in 1979, and it was kind of a bunch of people that had never really done anything like that before, and I guess that's because nothing like that had really happened. Mainly a group of hippies who'd moved out of the big cities and had fallen in love with the forest, and so when they saw that the forest was going to get torn down, they didn't really have any of the trainings or tactics or language that we use for organising today, but they just went in and kind of made it up as they went along. And they did things like they just slowly walked in front of the bulldozers, kind of, or there's an amazing clip where it shows them they stopped the bulldozers so they could sing at a song. There was a lot of music used. People were climbing up trees. And And it's just really interesting to watch these people. They didn't have the tools that we have, but as we can see in the picture, the way that they ended up organizing and making decisions was very similar to how we do things today, in kind of a big circle. Everyone comes together. There are meetings where anyone can come along and input. It was kind of like consensus decision making. So yeah, really, really inspiring story. The next slide shows the LEARD forest. So this is actually where Frontline Action on Coal was born. It started in August 2012 in the LEARD State Forest in northwest New South Wales. And after a while it moved onto the farm of Cliffy, who was, still is, an amazing farmer in the area, who was on side and just said, you know, if you're getting harassed in the forest, yeah, come and stay on my farm, which was pretty amazing for people to have that experience living on a farm while being part of the blockade. And so they were protecting, yeah, the LEARD State Forest with all of its endangered animals. And it was actually the first blockade against a coal mine in Australia. And one of the special things about that blockade is that they formed the LEARD Forest Alliance, which still has a protection treaty with the Gomeroi people, who are the indigenous people of that area. So you can find that in the Frontline Action on Coal website, and that's just a really good example of kind of environmentalist greenies working together with the First Nations people of the area to protect country and culture. And the LEARD's kind of both a happy and a sad story. And I'll read out a quote that somebody who lived there for quite a long time, for quite a few years, said. Says, "When people ask, did you win? Did you save the LEARD? Heartbreaking, I reply, no. The forest has been almost completely destroyed, and in its place lies a huge pit. But what sprang from that place was the galvanizing of a movement and a new generation of climate warrior, ready to take on big coal, with the determination that what we just witnessed will never, ever happen again." So I joined FLAC kind of while the LEARD was still happening, and kind of saw that kind of heartbreaking story of, you know, people who've lost this amazing forest to a coal mine, but also that, you know, the skills and the national network that FLAC exists as today was kind of born out of that, and then it's now going on to do other things. The next slide, people also might recognize this blockade. Oh, Minna, could you go to the next one? Oh, yep. So blockade IMARC. So this was late last year, and people might have seen it on the news. It got quite a lot of time on the news, unfortunately, showing all of the aggressive aggression and violence from the police. But what it was a mass blockade of the International Mining and Resource Conference, which happens in Melbourne at the end of each October every year. So probably will still go ahead this year unless we can stop it. And what I found really special about that blockade is, from the get-go, we were trying to center the marginalized voices of people affected most by mining. So especially people on the front lines in places like Latin America, Southeast Asia, and of course, Indigenous people of this country. And so, yeah, we successfully disrupted the conference and successfully, you know, got the word out there that this disgraceful conference of climate criminals is happening in Melbourne. And yeah, it was a very, full-on time. But being there was quite special, and one of my favorite memories from it was all of the videos that we received from people all over the world, you know, who are trying to stop Rio Tinto or BHP, bulldoze their forest or move their, town. And yeah, just them kind of thanking us for standing up to these criminals while they're all trying to meet together. So that was really, really special, even though the police violence kind of overshadowed a lot of things. And we'll be back again this year. So stay tuned. And now I'll hand over to Andy to talk about 2 blockades that are currently happening. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Anisa. There's certainly in Australia an amazing history of blockading that you can't even begin to cover in a little talk like we are now. And it's been a tactic used for lots of different reasons over the years, all kinds of environmental reasons and other political campaigns. But we did want to mention a couple that are going on right now, even continuing while so many other things seem to have been shut down. And that's the Djapwurrung camp in Victoria near Ararat, sort of west of Melbourne. And the other is the Deebing Creek camp near Ipswich, just between Brisbane and Ipswich. And both of these are Aboriginal campaigns about sites that are significant to them that are both being threatened. In Victoria, at Djapwurrung country, it's about a highway expansion that would bulldoze some significant trees, sacred trees, to the Djapwurrung people. And so for over a year now, there's been, well over a year, I suppose a year and a half now, there's been a permanent presence there, and then willing to blockade, willing to take direct action there, but also keeping a presence there and connecting people to that country. And the other, at Deebing Creek as well, it's been a long campaign where a private developer is trying to subdivide land and build sort of suburban blocks on it, on land that is was once the Deebing Creek Mission, and so a place where it's the Yuggera people there, where people from all over would have lived for a long time, and there's a cemetery there of buried bodies and things like that. And the Yuggera people want a cultural centre built on that site. And so both of those are going on, and they're both significant, I think, in the use of this tactic of blockading, which has been used in a lot of different ways. We talked about, was developed at TERANIA Creek there by sort of people, sort of hippies who had one kind of way of thinking about it, but actually it uses things that are very ancient, like Aboriginal ideas of connection to country, which is a very old idea, and the idea of being present in a place. And the being present not just means seeing that place, but also being accountable to it and taking responsibility for a place by staying there. And so I think they're both significant campaigns as well that use this very variable and very effective tactic of your physical presence, of living together and living on the front lines. And so both things that are worth your support. You can check out both info about both of them on your social media and things like that. And when you get a chance to travel again, you can even stop in and see what's going on there. I think that's about it. We move on to the next bit.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. One thing I did want to ask, and if anyone had questions, please chuck them into the chat now. We've got a bit of a section here where we can ask some questions. But Anisa, with the blockade IMARC, I mean, I guess it's a bit of a modern blockade in the sense that, people rocked up during the day and then they went home at night time. Do you think that's something that could happen in the same way at like more rural blockades, or do you think there's some kind of crossover there or some future for a more transient blockade, especially like for the Adani, where the space is quite long, like the rail line and the mine?
Could you clarify the question, as in what sort of things we can bring from IMARC?
Yeah. especially in the fact that, it was a blockade during the day, but people went home at night.
Well, I mean, in many ways it was a lot easier because being in the city, you don't have to travel, and so it's quite a lot more accessible. And so I think it's just, I mean, to me, there are so many things that need to be blockaded right now. We're all in this call, so we know how insane it is to continue, digging up coal and building new coal mines. And so people Blockade IMAC definitely had a very different feel to what going up to Camp Binbee would have. And so people with, the lifestyles and the needs that everyone has to, do, whether that's go to work or, it was great to have people come along to Blockade IMAC before work. So in that way it was a lot more accessible. But yeah, I think, they're different. They're really special, I think, in their own ways. And as we I think we need to keep picking up the pace and picking up the momentum. And so having blockades of things in cities, mining conferences is really, really important. And we saw that earlier this year in February. There was going to be a coal mining conference in Wollongong, and because people had already started organising to blockade it, and there was hundreds of people that were already going to go, they cancelled the conference. So it can be quite successful.
There's an interesting question here that I'm interested in both your thoughts on, which is how much resources are available to blockading and direct action versus the more legal stuff, seeing that NGOs are often reluctant to provide funding to blockades. I know that's been a bit of a point of contention at the Adani blockade in particular, whether NGOs are supporting it well enough.
Well, it's really, really hard, I think, and you can see the difference between the LEARD blockade and the Adani blockade, where with the LEARD blockade there were a lot more NGOs that, either up front or kind of a little bit more behind, mostly kind of slightly behind the scenes, were really supporting and, sending people, announcing it in all their meetings, sending emails out about it, money sent out. I wasn't there for most of the LEARD, but my understanding is there was a lot more NGO support. And now, with these new tax laws, it really does struggle, because a group like Frontline Action on Coal or the group like Blockade IMAC, for example, just doesn't have the reach of the NGOs. And so now we're in this really interesting space of how to kind of help, how to bridge that gap and help everyone, especially NGOs, support blockading, because we know that it works, but support it in whichever way they're comfortable, and how blockades can also, how we can help each other. But I think it's really, that's why the Mining Council of Australia petitioned for the change on tax, because it really, really does work. It divides us.
Andy, do you have any?
Yeah, I think it has the NGO sector has been sort of under attack by conservative governments, and one of the ways that they've done that is talking about, if you advocate any illegal activity, or then you can lose some of your government status, your tax deductible gift status and things like that. And so that's been a deliberate attempt by the government, and I think it's sort of to be expected. That's to expect some kind of resistance. And I think one of the things about direct action and blockading really that has in its advantage is because it is very grassroots. It is about people putting their presence there and using those very basic, just basic resources, living simply together, using your body and your willpower and things like that. It can survive even in the face of resistance. And so I think it's unfortunate. Yeah, it could do with more resources, and obviously it's difficult to get out there. The mine's very remote and a long way from big cities, and there's a constant need for resources. But I think we've got to remember that we're resilient, and we have resources amongst us, and we can sort of make things happen. And that's one of the things. If you go to the camp, a lot of people are amazed by how well set it up it is, and that's because a lot of people are putting a lot of work into it.
People are talking about Franklin, the Franklin River blockade and Bentley blockade, both fairly well known and quite successful blockades for living memory. Do you from what you've picked up through the stories, maybe neither of you were there, but do you feel like there's a lot of similarities, or do you think there have been lessons learnt from those blockades and being applied to the Adani blockade today in terms of how it's run, the governance, how it runs actions, how it reaches out to the community?
I can jump in here, Nick. I did spend a little bit of time actually in the Northern Rivers blockades, a bit at Bentley, more at Doubtful Creek, which was the one before. And I think, but to go back to, say, the Franklin and some of that tradition, it's amazing sometimes when you read some of those stories about the Franklin, how similar it is to what we do now. You know, it's been a progression. It's not that these things start up in one part of the country and then stop and then begin again somewhere else. There's been a sort of, the history of Australian environmental blockading is kind of a progression, and so a lot of these things have been refined, and even from TERANIA Creek, some of those original blockaders, after having success there, they made a group called NAG, Nomadic Action Group, and they went around doing blockades from North Queensland to Tassie, at the Franklin, to Central Australia at Roxby Downs, and they really learnt a lot about techniques that worked and refined those and shared them. And so that tradition's carried on ever since then, with a lot of forest blockading and uranium mines and city blockades and things like that. And so a lot of the things, like people when they come having like a kind of training course in nonviolent direct action, and trying to make an affinity group of people you trust that can do an action together, and use some of these techniques, locking yourself to things, tripods. These have all been developed over the years in different campaigns, and they're continued. And I think Bentley was an incredible campaign as well, and we've been fortunate, I guess, in recent times to have learnt from that and the way of building community. One of the things at Bentley was it really put a lot of effort into building community strength around it. You know, a lot of work going into talking to local community members and something like that. And so it's a bit harder doing that in central Queensland than it is in northern New South Wales when it comes to environmental issues. But that's definitely a lesson that's been learned from that.
Maybe this is a good segue then, because the next thing we were going to talk about was a little bit more specifically the Adani camp and where that sort of started and got to, and a bit of an overview of W&J. Do we want to go back to the screen share now? And Andy, were you going to talk to that?
Yes, I was. And I was going to start with where Anisa actually talked about, which was the LEARD Forest campaign, which was the birth of Frontline Action on Coal. The Maules Creek coal mine was a proposed mine back in 2012, and it I've gone, there's a picture of Japaran. We'll get there in the photos, we'll skip through. So
actually, Andy,
a lot of the tech.
Is it alright if we give this this YouTube?
Yeah, sure. Watch it and then we'll come back.
Yeah, cool. So this is everyone can jump on YouTube at another time to check it out. But we thought we might as well just put it in now and make sure that that's fresh in everyone's mind. That you know this fight against Adani on this country is with the Wangan and Jagalingou people.
The Wangan Jagalingou claim has been operating since 2004, 15 years or so. You know, we've had to prove to the state, the government, that we're the people from this land.
Today I'm talking about the spirits here, the wind. You know, the old people here with us today. You know, we speak on behalf of them because they're not here to represent them. We're here to represent them. We're here to tell a story. We're here to show these people that, you know, what they've done to our old people. Traumatized them, took them away from this land here, where my father was born, where my grandfather, my great-grandfather. They're taken away, told them not to speak their language, told them to stop their law and custom. But, you know, we kept that, our father kept that handed down to our family. We still have that strong today.
If I don't get my native title, then it's going to be twice as hard for us to go out onto our sacred places to be able to perform ceremonies, because we won't have any legal standing. We'll just be classed as somebody that's not from this country.
So why is it that we're being scrutinised when they know we come from here? But it just seems that they've set the benchmark far higher for W&J people. This country here, the Galilee Basin, is rich in mineral resources, and the state doesn't want any problems with people with having to deal with Indigenous land use agreements and great amounts of compensation.
Throughout this whole process of us fighting, all it has done was just make our family stronger, strengthen family and stronger in culture. The more that they try and push us to the brink of dispossessing us, the more that makes us want to fight.
Why would we stand as we have and had this fight if it wasn't our country? I think the onus of proof should be on the state government to prove that we weren't here. Our ancestors weren't here, because they were here and they were taken away from here.
I want to see that the outcome that we are recognised. You know, recognised with the court, recognised with the judge, recognised to the state, recognised to the, you know, this nation, that we are the people. We are the right people for this land.
And our voice is so much stronger now today that we are all united against the state taking away and destroying our native title claim. And it's incumbent now upon the state government, the Palaszczuk government, to come and negotiate with us. It's a very sad day for Queensland in general if the government doesn't stand in and negotiate with us on a true settlement for our native title rights and our native title claim to this land that has been here since time immemorial.
So that there is a little clip from the Wangan and Jagalingou people who, if you can see that map there, is the country where the Adani mine would be built. You can see it's quite some way from the coast, but that little rail line you can see going through is I guess a sign of where the countries that will be affected. And so Wangan and Jagalingou is where they'll be digging the pit, and so that's, I guess, one of the biggest effects to Aboriginal people's traditional lands there. But from pit to port, as they say, the Adani mine goes through a number of different Aboriginal countries that you can see there. Jenga is part of where the rail line would go through, as is Birri. And Dureau is where the rail line would end and where the port, the Adani's Abbott Point port, is already. And there was quite some controversy about that, about potentially expanding that port and dredging and dumping the dredge spoil on the Galilee Valley wetlands, which is part of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park as well. And so the Dureau people were a big part of that campaign against that, which was quite successful, really. It was a win back in 2015 when Queensland Labor got back in, partly on a policy of stopping that dredging and not putting government money into the Adani mine. And so Dureau elders and people were significant in that. And Birri's been quite significant in the fight as well, because that is where the camp, Camp Binbee, is situated on Birri country. And originally, when a permanent camp was first set up, it was actually on land owned by some local Birri people there who were very supportive of the campaign. And we still try to maintain relationships with them, as well as with the Wangan and Jagalingou people who have been fighting for a long time, as you saw in that 15 years, struggling to get native title over that land. But now it's 5 years that they've been working against the mine. So to just go back a little bit more of a history of the mine campaign, if we go back to the LEARD forest, which Anisa talked about, which is where both me and Anisa first got involved in Frontline Action on coal as part of that campaign. And it was 2.5 years of having a permanent camp there. And the first time really that those kind of occupation blockade tactics had been used against a coal mine. Traditionally they were used mostly, they had been used for uranium mines, but also in forest, like to stop native forests being cut down for timber exports. And so a lot of those techniques were then taken. Climate change obviously is a massive environmental threat, more significant even than things like uranium or deforestation. And so that campaign was a big part of talking about using direct action to try to stop a coal mine. And so from there, as in 2014, the middle of 2014, the Adani mine was approved by Campbell Newman's state Liberal government in the Galilee Basin, which as yet is a kind of untapped coal seam. And so it's not just one mine, it's a lot of coal that should be left in the ground if we're going to meet our Paris Climate Agreement goals. And so potentially its carbon impact is immense, more than even than just the mine. And so it was talked about a need to focus Australia's climate movement on this mine as a symbol of all new coal mines, but also as a very practical way of stopping an entire new reserve of fossil fuels being put into our atmosphere. And so at the end of 2015, of 2014, as the Maules Creek campaign, it started to become clear that we weren't going to stop that mine. People started preparing for the next big fight, which was going to be Adani. And so early in 2015, people started moving up to live up at in sort of Airlie Beach, Mackay, that area, to try to resist the Adani mine and build support locally. And it was a big part of the state election that year. As I already said, Labor got in quite a surprise victory. They won a lot of seats that they had lost at the previous sort of landslide election. And a big part of that was concern over the Adani mine and the Great Barrier Reef. And so a big part of that came from the campaigning. Is there a photo there of an action from 2015, Nick? Some people up at, I think at Airlie Beach doing, there's a few photos there. I'll just mention, it became so there was protests up there specifically often about the port expansion, Adani's port expansion. But also in 2015 is where the Wangan and Jagalingou campaign really starts stepping up. And you can see a picture on the left there of Adrian Burragubba and Murrawa Johnson standing out the front of a bank. And they're both Wangan and Jagalingou people. And as part of their campaign against the mine, they did a tour actually of world banks, traveling around to the US and Europe, telling some of the world's biggest banks that they shouldn't invest in the Adani mine because it doesn't have the consent of Aboriginal people as well as its carbon impacts. And so that became a big part of that campaign. And they then took it to court. Took Adani's ILUA, their Indigenous Land Use Agreement, to court, saying that the document was illegitimate because it sort of, the process picture by which they came about getting people to sign it was a bit of a sham. And that's a long story. You can look that up elsewhere. But there was many years of court cases and different appeals that Wangan and Jagalingou people have been through, at the same time running a kind of public campaign against it. And that's been one of the most significant parts of the Stop Adani movement amongst the local Stop Adani groups and the Frontline campaign. In 2017, the camp set up permanently. There's a few more photos. There's one from the LEARD. There's one from back at 2015, that Reef Defenders one. In 2017, a camp was set up permanently, originally on the land of some of those Binbee people, and then after about 6 months, we got a block of land just up the road from there to set up and try to build a frontline campaign. And that was where we really started being able to do direct action blockades. And so in the previous photos, there was somebody locked on to a machine with a banner saying Adani, this is just the beginning. And that was from the first set of kind of direct actions up there. There was a big call out of people going up there. There's also a famous photo, if you remember, of people blocking the Abbott Point Road to the coal terminal with a letter saying, "We will stop Adani." And that was the beginning really of several years now of pretty much uninterrupted direct action. There's been hundreds of people arrested, and stopping coal trains on the coal line, stopping coal getting into the Abbott Point port, going to the Adani office in Townsville, and all kinds of things, disrupting the operation, the building of this mine. And then in August last year was when Adani finally, after all these years, began work on the mine, on the mine site itself. And just as they did that, we started, there's a photo, a couple of things back, there's a photo of the first action on the actual mine site, which was a couple of people up on monopoles suspended from a number of machines. There was actually 17 different machines were blocked off by those two monopoles. And I think Amy, who was one of the people suspended from those poles, is actually with us tonight. So good on you, Amy. That was an iconic action that really got sent. That image got sent around a lot and brought a lot of people up there. And in the second half of last year, you can see in the top right-hand corner, there's a bunch of machines being immobilized by Amy and Ruben, suspended from poles. And so in the last 6 months, we were doing constant actions, constantly stopping work on that mine, and hundreds of people have been arrested up there. I don't think we've actually kept count to know how many, but there's been a lot of successes which I wanted to highlight as well. And one is that a number of companies have publicly distanced themselves from working with Adani, which is a direct result of that campaign. And there's no other reason why a company publicly says who they're not going to work with. It's because the people-powered campaign has been so strong. And so that's a win that we've had. And also the mine's been delayed a long time. Adani hoped to have it up and running years ago at this point, and also downsized. The original proposal has been rejected for a smaller one that they are more able to finance themselves and more able to get through government, as well as the original port dredging that didn't happen. And still, Adani doesn't have all the pieces together to build their mine. They're still looking for insurance. They're still struggling for some of the contractors they need to do the job. And so it's a campaign that's still going, and a campaign that's had a lot of successes along the way. And a part of those successes as well is a lot of people learning the skills and learning the power that we have as people to go up against these big mining companies. And so that's why we're going to keep going and encourage you all to get involved.
Cool. Thanks, Andy. That was sick. Yeah, you don't often get it presented all in one go like that. It's good to reflect on some of the amazing stuff that camp has done, and the people who've been at camp that have done, and a lot of different groups that have supported that. So we're going to do a bit of a breakout just to change it up and get people talking, because we're on here until 8:30, which is somewhat of a mammoth session, but we think we reckon you're all up for it. And if you're not, that's okay. You can leave at any time. We're recording this, and you can watch it back later if you want to. So we're going to go into breakout rooms of around, so there'll be about 10 groups of 5 maybe. That seems like it's a reasonable amount of people, and the point of these sessions is to talk about some of the barriers that people have overcome to getting to camp, emotional, physical. There's a lot that we face in going to take action at the front line. And so we were keen to get some of those short stories shared around and people talking about, those two questions, which is for anyone that has been to camp, what are some of the things you overcame to get there? And for those that haven't been to camp, what are some of the things that you face that you're a little bit concerned by? And it'd be good to get some of that written down in the slides, slide 17. Mina's just chucked that link into the chat there. For anyone that can write down some of the reflections that are being shared, that would be great. Bless you, Mitch. That'd be great to see as well, and then we can reflect on that when we come back. So we'll sort people out into breakout rooms now, and you're going through those two questions, which are, if you've been to a blockade, what are some of the barriers you overcame? And if you haven't, what are some of the barriers you feel like you're facing? So we'll go for maybe 10 minutes and come back and have a bit of a reflection. In the interest of time, we might just move on to this next section. Anisa is going to share a bit of a reflection and one of the barriers that she feels like is an important one to address. You ready for that, Anisa?
Yep.
Cool.
So one of the barriers for me, and that I've heard for other people, maybe not so much in actually getting up there, but kind of how to be up there, is kind of understanding that you're blockading on Aboriginal land, you're blockading on stolen land, and that can be a really difficult thing. For me, growing up in Melbourne, and it's taken me a lot of learning and unlearning to work out kind of how best to do my activism and do it in solidarity with the First Nations people up there, especially for me living and getting to know Kenny and Maria, who are Biri people up near camp, has been really amazing. So I guess I just quickly wanted to share some learnings and some of the difficult stuff that I went through in that. But yeah, this is just my experience, and I very much encourage people to seek out information, from different Indigenous people and traditional owners to help you understand the best ways to kind of work in solidarity and protect both the environment and culture, which is very closely intertwined. And so for me, one of the biggest things was to slow down and listen. As I said, from Melbourne, kind of big city life, it's all go, 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 and I'm very focused on getting things done and being productive. And some really good chats I had up there was kind of, how to arrive and kind of really slow down, listen to the land, get to know the land, get to know what's going on at camp before just jumping straight in, was really, really amazing. And also with that, the kind of importance of genuine, slow relationships. Because I think, as we talked about, there's been some, there's been a sometimes wonderful and sometimes difficult history with environmental campaigns, working with First Peoples to protect the land. And there's been some really good things that have come out, but there's also been, some tokenization, some relationships that have been screwed up, some things done badly. So for me, kind of that slowing down and really just listening was really, really, really important. And then also learning about the power of corporations and how that works in corrupting the process, and just the difficulties that different, like as we saw from Adrian Burragubba and the Wagan and Jagalingou people, the difficulties with Adani and different corporations like that, and how they use money to corrupt the process. And we'll send around a really good video by NITV that talks a little bit, people might have followed the kind of difficulties within Indigenous communities, and important for us to remember the difficult economic situations that exist for a lot of people up there and a lot of Indigenous communities up there, and that there's a whole lot of different opinion in the Aboriginal community, just like there is with all other communities. And so that's another reason that, yeah, slowing down, understanding how complicated it is, and being okay when sometimes things don't work out that well. Sometimes you'll try your best to do something really well and you'll do it badly, and you'll be told that you've done it badly. And that's okay. That's part of learning, and not being really hard on each other or ourselves, and just being able to accept when things go to shit, and and to keep reflecting and learning, and the importance of self-work, working on yourself, understanding your own emotions. So yeah, those are just some things that I learnt, which helped me both, in my solidarity work and trying to support the struggles of First Peoples. But it's been amazing how it's also helped me in my activism in general, the kind of slowing down, listening, genuine relationships, finding time to kind of connect to the environment that I'm in. So yeah, it's amazing.
Cool. And we're going to delve a little deeper into that particular topic in a few weeks. We'll be talking with Claire Land and Chris Twining and Edie Shepherd and Siobhan Nayland about how we're decolonising, how we're answering the question for ourselves of how we relate to racism and colonialism, and how that plays out at the camp, because it is important that we're constantly asking ourselves that question and constantly coming to deal with that question in a meaningful way that is creating an embodiment of decolonising and creating some tacit knowledge for us. So the next bit, Andy, you were going to talk about, you had put some time and thought into how blockades contribute to the progressive movement and progressive political ideas. And I think you were going to, I mean, you had some photos. I can't remember if we decided that you wanted them to be shown or not.
If you want to get them up, you can. But you can also, I guess, yeah. To start off with, there's a few photos from some occupations.
Where are they, Andy? Just before you start, sorry. Where do I get them from? The photos.
Oh, they're in that Google Drive folder, I think.
Okay. Oh, in the one from before, the one with the flak ones.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cool. So they're...
All right. Just let me know which ones you want and I'll share them.
Sort of towards the end, maybe we'll grab up some of them, of a few pictures from around the world, of kind of occupations. But I think one of the things that's worth talking about is that we do have this history of blockading as a tactic in Australian environmental and political movements, but also around the world, the idea of occupying space together with a group of people. And beyond just the Adani campaign, it does have a political value, both for the people involved and for different campaigns and our capacity as a whole, as a movement, I think. And so a couple of things I want to talk about for that. One is the idea of empowerment, personal empowerment, and that comes from taking direct action. And one facet of that is that you can directly, physically stop something from happening, which in other elements of political action, you might disagree with something and you might lobby against it, but it's rare that you can physically stop it from happening. But in direct action, that's exactly what you do, whether you're standing in front of something or locking on. And so you see that kind of tangible impact. But also it empowers yourself. It takes your body from a kind of passive onlooker in all these things that we see on the news and disagree with, and turns you into an active participant. And that's a really significant thing, because so often there's such a message of disempowerment all the time in our society when it comes to politics. We feel so removed from where decisions are made. And by taking direct action, by going to the front line of something, we're training ourselves to believe that actually we are actively involved and we can make a difference. And so that empowerment aspect's really big. Another part of that similar is the idea, and it goes back to that Aboriginal idea of being on country and a connection to a place. And so by going to the front lines, you build a personal connection with the place or the campaign that you're fighting for. It goes beyond, it's not just a theoretical abstraction, you know, it's an actual place where you've been and feel connected to, and you've walked that land, and you feel accountable to it too. You're there kind of protecting that place. The third element that I wanted to talk about is that by going sort of away from our normal lives and becoming immersed in a campaign and a community, we really change ourselves and the way that we live. One is that we develop skills in ourselves that we maybe didn't know that we had. We'd never had an opportunity before. Sometimes we'd been discouraged for various reasons. If you're a woman in our society, often not encouraged to build things, do manual labor, do, you know, bush coordinates out in the bush, spying on things, whatever tactics you might use. But you get an opportunity when you're out there in the front line. You do whatever task comes up, and it's a really a skill building thing for a lot of people, and those skills are often taken into other places. But also as part of that immersion, we build connections with each other, and we build these sort of really strong connections that come from hard work, living together day in, day out, eating together, you know, doing the tasks of daily life, as well as some kind of sometimes very intense moments. And so those kind of connections, and living in the camp, you can try to create the world that we want to live in. And so things like at Frontline Action on Coal, that means decisions by consensus rather than by a hierarchy or a majority vote, talking things out and to make decisions. It means growing food and trying to live sustainably at the camp. And also part of that as well, like Anisa was talking about, is taking the idea of Aboriginal issues away from just a theoretical thing to building actual relationships with Aboriginal people. And that's been a big part of campaigns from, say, Jabiluka in the north, James Price Point in Western Australia, and like Anisa set up at Adani. And so those are all that's been part of that process of learning what it means like to live together. And so the last bit, I guess, is as part of a broader campaign, and to get a win in the environment movement takes a lot of elements of a campaign, but by having people on the front lines, you can watch what's going on. At FLAC, we've been the people that have been keeping an eye on what Adani's actually doing, and when Adani was prosecuted for not reporting illegal work, it was FLAC that was the one who knew that they were doing that because we were out there. And also we keep the workers accountable. They have to come face to face with the community opposition because we're there, and they can't just forget about it. And also the conflict of direct action always gets the media, which the people's disapproval doesn't always. The dramatic action is a way of getting that story out there and bringing to the surface the tension that exists between a government and a corporation that wants to do something and a public that doesn't want them to do that. And the other thing about it is that it allows everybody to make a contribution. Because your contribution is by being there, it doesn't require special skills or amazing privileges or anything. Like, anybody can go there and find a way that they can contribute. And so in terms of building mass movements, how to get a lot of people involved, that kind of occupation is a really powerful way to do it. And so just to finish off, I wanted to say that in Australia, we've talked about the environment movements, and there's been a lot of campaigns there. I don't know if you got those photos there, Nick. There's it doesn't matter.
My bad.
That's all right.
I can't find the drive.
That's
Sorry.
all right. Well, I'll just so in Australia, we've talked about some of those things, that environmental, and around the world, there's been big campaigns. In recent years, we've seen Standing Rock in the US, a really significant campaign linking Indigenous people and environmentalists and all kinds of people to come together and live together. And last year, really significant campaigns that were direct action in Hong Kong gained a lot of attention, but in Sudan, a country with a lot of poverty and a military dictatorship for decades, they brought down that dictator with a campaign of direct action that involved an occupation that went for a week. With, at one point, there were reports that there were 1 million people sitting in at Parliament House, and people were feeding each other, living together, and it's a tactic that has been used all around the world to do all kinds of things. And so it will continue to have an important role in any campaign, as well as the Adani one.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Andy. That was truly rousing. That was really good. So yeah, 5 minutes to go. We're pretty much done here. All that there is left is to thank everyone for coming along. Galilee Rising doesn't have a huge ask at the moment. You know, coronavirus has got us in a position where we have to look at our local communities and think of our loved ones and those nearest to us, and make sure that we're looking after each other. And you know, mutual aid has really grown up because of it, and it's really amazing to see. But we hope that everyone keeps thinking about the Adani blockade and blockades more generally, and how they might be relevant to the kinds of changes that we want to see in Australia and more broadly, especially as you know, the government may look to implement austerity measures and different changes to our economic and social landscape after coronavirus. Des, I see you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something else? Yeah.
Just quickly, in the last couple of weeks I've been in the recording studio editing music and newsreel spoken words to a few mainstream songs. I'd like to present it to you guys somehow. I don't know, it's a pretty big file. It travels best with either on Signal or email, but it does mention Adani and the Galilee Basin, and I was just wondering who I could send that to share, and maybe share amongst yourselves, and hopefully it's inspiring, and I'd like to do something with it, with the actual hardcore warriors, and yeah.
Yeah, cool, Des. That sounds awesome. Definitely send it through, and so after this, we're gonna send through a follow-up email. There's also going to be a blog post on Galilee Rising page, and that'll be shared around on social media and Flack and Galilee Rising.
Chuck in the chat. So if you're inspired or want to be more inspired, I'm going to chuck in the chat a article that is 40 years of Australian blockading songs. So you can go away and tonight have a listen, look through some of the history. There's some really, really good songs. If people haven't eaten dinner, you still need to cook dinner, put them on and learn them. Because yeah, as you say, there's songs are so important, I mean, for life, but for blockading and activism, they keep us together and keep us inspired. So please have a listen. Cool.
Yeah, so we were gonna finish it up at 8:30. So thanks everyone who came along. Our next session is on consent and consensus, and that's looking like it'll be really interesting. Good conversation to delve deeper into some of those issues that we often miss out when we're in that hectic organising schedule. But Anisa and Andy and I we're going to stay on here for a little bit longer and chat to anyone that wanted to ask questions. But for those people who feel like they need to go, feel free. And also just keep in mind that if you feel like you need something to eat and you haven't sorted that out yet, we've got the Deliveroo vouchers. Just let us know if you need one. We're happy to cater for you. So yeah, thanks everyone who came along. It was great to see everyone, and hopefully we'll all be at camp together soon.